So what is the upshot of my argument? Powerful, if often unseen and little understood historical forces emerged or manifested itself in the American state of California during the 1970s that upended, and in many cases remade, global economic society, economics, culture, and politics. And in particular, how human beings self-identify, how they associate and relate to others, and how they interacted with important institutions around them. In other words, what it meant to be a human being completely changed. These changes spread like wildfire throughout the world, sometimes explicitly and other times unnoticed. It upended the role of the state, how we think about power, and what matters in the world. Pretty big claims to be sure. Perhaps the most consequential was the disruptive emergence of Silicon Valley as a hub for profound technological change. Now, this was preceded and accelerated by a less well-recognized development, the emergence of Southern California as a defense and aerospace superpower, with institutions such as Caltech, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and defense contractors like Northrop Grumman. But if the world we live in is defined by the digital revolution and in the profound changes in the way we use computers to navigate life, this change began, expanded, and intensified in an area that is part of the greater San Francisco area around the Santa Clara Valley. It did not simply do things like increase computer power and capabilities, but first through Apple, began to put these tools in the hands of individuals, unintermediated by larger collective organizations such as the state, eventually making all of the world's information available to anyone, essentially for free. The Silicon Valley experience also transformed how we think about capitalism, innovation, and how we finance it, with the rise of new venture capital and the new startup culture. A year after the term Silicon Valley was coined, Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield, and Byers opened an office in Menlo Park, creating a new way of financing emerging technology that avoided traditional, more conservative banks by pooling venture capital. A more mundane but equally important example is the container shipping revolution, which emerged in several different places around the world, but transformed the ports of California, and particularly the adjacent ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, into global trading powerhouses and massively decreasing the cost of shipping goods. The ports of California, utilizing the new, less labor-intensive technologies of containers and container ships, became the hub in the immensely increased economic interaction between the United States and the rising economies of East Asia. First Japan, then the Pacific Tigers, and then eventually China. And in the process, dramatically transformed access to endless amounts of consumer goods to almost any citizen in the world. A force that combined both economic power and American soft power was the Hollywood film and television industry. Hollywood had long made entertainment for the world, but in the mid-1970s, the American film industry began to produce blockbusters on a new scale with increased global reach. One can think of Jaws and Star Wars as the beginning of this trend, and the volume of film receipts, nationally but especially globally, increased ever since. The post-1970s Hollywood powerfully influenced taste, fashions, and ideas around the world. And despite great efforts, no other national film or now streaming industry has been able to approach Southern California's power. A similar conflation of economic and cultural power was the rise of Napa and Sonoma Valley's wine industry, demonstrated in the 1976 wine test in Paris, captured in the film Judgment in Paris, where a group of California wines, white wines, dominated the top rankings, and a gold medal was awarded to the 1973 Stag's Leap. Some of the biggest changes, however, emerged over issues of personal identity. Governor Ronald Reagan, that famous conservative, signed the United States' first no-fault divorce law, as well as a liberal abortion law, fundamentally altering American family dynamics forever. California developed some of the first legal protections against discrimination in housing and employment, including an early law protecting pregnant women from termination. How humor was generated and employed changed in this period. When the popular late-night television show host, Johnny Carson, moved his show from New York City to Burbank, he joined the Comedy Store of Los Angeles to make Southern California the capital for modern stand-up comedy, aimed at subjects ranging from gender and race relations to politics to routine observations. While much of this humor upended polite norms and challenged traditional authority and belief, it became enormously popular and transformed how and at what people laughed. How we dress was remade. San Francisco clothing store Levi Strauss went public in 1971 and moved from providing blue jeans to cowboys to creating a global brand that has become part of a sort of universal uniform of sorts. San Francisco in this period also became the global epicenter for gay culture and lifestyle that was no longer kept hidden. It developed as a nascent political force with the election and tragic assassination of gay advocate Harvey Milk to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Before 1970, to give another example, physical exercise regimes were rare, and exercise in public was even rarer. If you were seen jogging in the 1960s, you were more likely to be arrested than praised. Professional athletes were warned off weightlifting for fear it would damage their health. Gold's Gym and the muscle pen of Venice Beach, which launched Arnold Schwarzenegger, became the model for the ubiquitous health clubs that are now seen throughout the world. And to the south, in San Fernando Valley, it became the capital of the booming global trade in pornography, films and photos showing human sexuality in ways that were unthinkable before the 1970s, a phenomenon that's, of course, captured in Paul Thomas Anderson's 1997 film, Boogie Nights. This California dreaming story matters for at least two reasons. First, what happened in California in the 1970s played an outside role in creating the world we live in today, both in the United States and in large parts of the globe, including even unlikely suspects as China and even Russia, for better or for worse. It is not an exaggeration to say that this was a historical shift on par with the Industrial Revolution. The means of producing wealth moved from a domestically based, mass industrialized economy to a more decentralized system focused in just-in-time manufacturing, sensitive and integrated global supply chains, complex finance, and especially revolutionary information and communications technology. Personal identity shifted away from the fixed characteristics and affiliations with large, inflexible histories and organizations, ethnic and national origin, political parties, churches and synagogues, unions, corporations, communities, and giving way to the curated, flexible, often autonomous conceptions of the self based on individual preferences and tastes that currently dominate our world. Demographics were upended. Where and how people lived and with whom they cohabitated transformed as the structure and composition of both family units and communities evolved dramatically. Politics became micro-targeted and focused as much on cultural issues as on the socio-economic concerns that dominated the first 3/4 of the 20th century. Everything, from markets to culture to identity to politics, became fluid, disaggregated, and disintermediated from legacy institutions, shaped by historically unprecedented amounts of choice and impermanence. Now, there are obviously many benefits to this transformation. Enormous amounts of wealth were generated. Tolerance of difference increasingly became the norm. Diversity was celebrated as a positive attribute. This upended how human beings saw themselves and each other. Global economic and cultural interactions intensified. Innovation exploded and technology dramatically increased access to vast amounts of knowledge and information, and communication became much easier and much cheaper. The choices available to the newly empowered individual, from travel to what a person ate, how a person worshiped, how a person earned their living, to what they laughed at and who and even if they married, was unparalleled. Now, there were obviously downsides to this world. This new wealth was spread unevenly and inequality worsened. Despite new attention to the environment, the consequences of this new California economy and lifestyle has had negative ecological consequences. And while entertainment and cultural options have become more diverse, they did not necessarily become more sophisticated. Even the most positive developments, the rise of tolerance and the celebration of diversity, engendered a fierce counter-reaction and generated the culture wars that frame and dominate politics ever since. The second reason and final reason that this California dreaming story matters is because it highlights the existence and importance of understanding competing histories. There's a textbook conventional wisdom about the United States during the 1970s that concentrates on malaise, corruption, violence, chaos, and American decline. The focus of this traditional history is on the failure of economic, political, and geopolitical institutions, not just in the United States, but in the major Western capitals. The California dreaming story, while not uniformly positive, is a dynamic story of Western growth, rebirth, and reimagination, which over decades helped reshape much of the world. Change, though dramatic, was often hard to recognize in real time, unlike the more traditional domestic and international and economic political narratives of the 1970s. Time horizons are not measured as much by shifting presidential administrations or foreign wars as by new technologies and popular mass entertainment events. To be clear, these competing narratives, one geopolitical and political, and the other socio-cultural, both economic and technological, can both be true and are obviously inextricably linked. But California dreaming should force us to think in more creative ways about the actors and agents that matter. What time horizons shape our current world, how to locate complex historical causality, and perhaps most important, how to reimagine how we understand power. The history of Apple Computer, or the rising influence of Hollywood, tells us much, if not more, about the rise, fall, and rebirth of this order that I'm talking about, than a microanalysis of any G7 or NATO summit meeting or any view of annual World Bank minutes. Power in international relations has often been understood as fixed, kinetic, material, built upon mass industrialized economies that can convert these assets and the capacity to build armies and navies and conquer territory. But the 1970s inaugurated the world we live in today, which looks little like the 1870s, and I would actually argue the crisis in Ukraine is the exception that proves the rule. These profound changes wrought by the 1970s are important to understand the confusing, chaotic, often dispiriting world we live in today. And it is not only an origin story. It reminds us that the often unsettling things we see in the headlines may not actually be the historical forces that matter most in shaping the order of the future. Thank you.
Did the ideas of the 1960s break ground? I'm thinking of flower power, Tim Leary, Vietnam protests, Black Panthers, and everything that happened, especially in California in the 60s.
I think, yes, there's obviously a connection, but one of the more interesting connections, if you start exploring Silicon Valley, is there's this interesting combination between high-tech libertarianism, sort of in the hippies of the sort of Apple computer world, and it's a very strange confluence of someone like Stuart Brand or Peter Schwartz or the whole Apple computer crowd. They were part of the flower power movement, but they were also libertarian in their instincts and also believed technology could free human beings. So there's a lot of sort of mixed origins to the story.
Which of these ideas spread to the rest of the United States, and how? To states that had no ports, had no Hollywood, had no Silicon Valley?
So I think over time, the notion that from an economic perspective, you look at sort of, I mean, there's a lot of ways to break this up. The access to all sorts of consumer goods that were far cheaper from around the world. If you look at the percentage of GNP that is trade in the United States in the 1950s, it's around 3%, right? That there's very little in the way of global interaction. And this transforms the ability to access all sorts of inexpensive manufactured goods. So that's one change. But I would say actually more on the identity and lifestyle front, whether it's divorce, whether it's feminism, whether it's changing conceptions of what a family is. That's the thing I think that spreads from California and really moves quite quickly throughout the rest of the country.
Do you see any signs that the United States is reinventing itself now?
I think the whole American project is a constant reinvention. I think that's actually the definition of what the United States is, to sort of never, to both be in a constant state of panic.
But what are the signs that this is going on still?
So I think one of the really interesting things why I engaged this project is there's long been these undercurrents in the U.S., whether it's technological change, whether it's sociocultural change, that are rarely captured in the front page of the newspapers. And I think that we're in a period right now that's similar to the 1970s, where there's a deep sense of pessimism, a sense of chaos, a sense of political dislocation. And historically, the United States actually has often been at its most innovative. And so if you look, you spend some time at MIT or in California or in San Diego, you see the extraordinary amount of technological innovation that's going on right beneath the surface in things like medicine and things like energy, in all sorts of areas that I think we're going to look at 20 or 30 years from now to be another step order leap in technological change.
Francis, thank you very much.
Thank you.